In 2012, the British government started paying its monarch through a single line item called the sovereign grant. That first year, it was £31 million. This year, it's £137.9 million, roughly $185 million. Nobody negotiated that. There was no pay review, no vote on the number, no minister who decided the king had earned more. A formula produced it, and that formula has a property almost no income on earth has. It's indexed to an asset the king does not own and cannot sell, and by law, it is not allowed to go down. The story everyone knows, including most British people, goes like this. The king owns a vast property empire. He hands the profits to the government. The government hands a slice back to run the monarchy. It's a swap. It's been a swap since 1760, and it costs the taxpayer nothing. Every part of that gets repeated by the palace, and the palace is not lying. The keeper of the Privy Purse said it out loud. Not one penny of the sovereign grant allocation requires additional income from general taxation. But a sentence can be completely true and still be doing an enormous amount of work. 3 engines explain how 31 million became 138, and not one of them is the swap. Start with the property empire, because the ownership is the load-bearing part. It's called the Crown Estate, £16.7 billion of it. Regent Street in central London, Windsor Great Park, one of the largest rural holdings in the country, and, this matters later, the seabed and most of the coastline around England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Here's how the Crown Estate describes itself on its own website. Quote, "The Crown Estate is not the private property of the king. The assets belong to the sovereign for the duration of their reign, but cannot be sold by them, nor do revenues from the assets belong to them." Read that twice, because it takes the swap apart. If the revenues were never his, then he isn't surrendering anything. He's declining to take something he could not have taken. And this isn't a modern Republican talking point. In 1952, the Chancellor of the Exchequer agreed in the House of Commons that the hereditary revenues were originally the monies that ran the country, and there was, in fact, no actual bargain. A conservative think tank paper in 1968 called the whole arrangement no more than a useless legal fiction. So if it isn't a swap, what is it? It's an index. The Crown Estate's profits are used as a benchmark to arrive at a figure, not as the source of the money. The Crown Estate pays into the government's main bank account. The Treasury pays the grant out of it. 2 separate flows, joined only by a formula. Now, the formula itself, which is where this gets genuinely strange. The sovereign grant is 12% of the Crown Estate's profit from 2 years earlier, unless that would mean the grant goes down. If the calculation comes out lower than last year's grant, the grant simply stays where it was, and the Treasury covers the difference. So it isn't really a percentage. It's the higher of 2 numbers. A percentage in the good years, a floor in the bad ones. Heads it rises, tails it holds. Parliament's own research service has a name for this. They call it the golden ratchet, and they've costed it. Across 3 financial years, ending in 2025, the ratchet alone was worth an extra £65.5 million, compared to what the formula would have paid without it. Here's the cleanest possible proof of how strong that flaw is. The government now wants to lower the grant. It can't. The Sovereign Grant Act generally prevents the grant from decreasing year on year. So bringing it down needs an act of Parliament. There is a bill, announced in the King's speech, whose job is to make a pay cut legally possible in the first place. Think about the last time your salary required new primary legislation before it was allowed to fall. Engine 2. If the percentage looks like the rule, watch what it actually does. It started at 15% in 2012. In 2017, it rose to 25% to fund a 10-year refurbishment of Buckingham Palace. In 2024, it came down to 12%, and from 2027, subject to legislation, it goes back up to 20.5%. 15, 25, 12, 20.5. That is not a rule. That's a dial, turned whenever the formula produced an answer somebody didn't want. And the 2024 turn is the best story in this whole episode. Remember the seabed? The Crown Estate leases it to offshore wind developers. And when Britain auctioned the rights for its 4th big round of offshore wind, the option fees were enormous. Over £1 billion in a single year. The Crown Estate's profit hit £1.1 billion. 25% of that number would have been spectacular. So the percentage was cut to 12%. The king himself asked for that review, which is documented. and which is to his credit. And the grant still went from 86.3 million to 132.1, a £45 million raise in the year the headlines said the king was taking less. Both things were true. Only one of them made the front page. One more feature of that dial, buried in the Act. Raising the percentage requires a debate in the House of Commons. Lowering it does not. Everything so far is the official money, the grant, for official duties. There's a second layer, and it's private. Two medieval estates, the Duchy of Lancaster, founded 1399, whose profits go to the king. The Duchy of Cornwall, founded 1337, whose profits go to the Prince of Wales. In the year to March 2025, Lancaster produced a net surplus of £24.4 million, and Cornwall 22.9. Now the mechanics of those two numbers. Neither duchy pays corporation tax. They're crown bodies, covered by a common law exemption. Neither the king nor the prince pays capital gains tax on duchy assets, because they aren't entitled to the capital. And the income tax they pay on the surplus is voluntary, not a reduced rate, voluntary. It's set out in a memorandum of understanding with the Treasury that is not law, and from which either side may give notice of withdrawal. They do pay. In June 2026, for the first time in history, the figures were published. 12.9 million from the king, 7.76 million from the Prince of Wales. Real money and a genuine step towards transparency. And one question always follows. What about everyone else? There is no separate pot. The sovereign grant funds the official duties of the king and every working royal out of the same account. There is no per-person allowance inside it. Until 2011, other members drew parliamentary annuities, and the late Queen refunded those to the Treasury herself. The king's private income arrives by a different route, the Privy Purse, the Duchy of Lancaster surplus, £21.2 million in 2025-2026. What he passes on from that to anyone else has never been published. That is an episode of its own. But look at who pays rent into these estates. A joint investigation by Channel 4's Dispatches and the Sunday Times traced around £50 million of deals with taxpayer-funded bodies. A £37.5 million lease of Dartmoor Prison to the Ministry of Justice. £11.4 million from an NHS trust over 15 years to store ambulances in a warehouse. State schools. The armed forces. Mooring boats. The duchies say they're private commercial estates, not funded by the taxpayer. Both halves of that can be true, while public money still flows in, as rent. And one last mechanic, which may be the strangest in British finance. If you die in the Duchy of Lancaster's territory with no will and no traceable relatives, your estate doesn't go to the government. It goes to the duchy. It's called bona vacantia. The Guardian found more than £60 million collected that way over a decade, with the money used to improve the estate's own properties. Now the honest other side, because this only works if you can state it properly. The Crown Estate returned £1.1 billion to the Treasury in 2024-25 and £5.1 billion over the past decade, against a grant of £86 million that year. On the cash alone, the government is enormously ahead, and the palace's line that no extra taxation is required is defensible arithmetic. The king did ask for the percentage reduction before the wind money landed. And every head of state costs money. Presidents have residences, staff, aircraft, and security too. The comparison is never monarchy versus free. Against that, the grant is not the whole bill. Security is excluded entirely and not disclosed at all. Outside estimates run from several million to 100 million a year. The late Queen's funeral cost the government 161.7 million. The coronation, 72 million. You'll see two numbers quoted as the truth here. The campaign group Republic says the real cost is about 510 million a year. The consultancy Brand Finance says the monarchy's net recurring benefit is 197 million. One comes from a group that wants an elected head of state, the other from a brand evaluation firm. Treat both as advocacy, and notice they don't even agree on the sign. What nobody contests is the formula. Nobody disputes the ratchet. It's in the Act. So, why does a mechanism this odd survive? Partly because nothing about it requires anyone to defend it in public. There's no annual vote on the amount. The number arrives already justified, calculated from accounts published 2 years earlier, produced by a business most people have never heard of. By the time you see the headline, the arithmetic is history, partly because of that asymmetry inside the Act. A rise gets debated. A cut doesn't have to be. Rules written that way don't stay neutral for long. But mostly, it's the denomination. If the monarchy were funded by a line in the budget, it would be argued over every year, like everything else. Instead, it's denominated in the profits of a property company, and lately, in the price of leasing the ocean floor. Almost nobody looks at a wind farm and thinks, royal finance. That's exactly why it works. The mechanic, in one line, index your income to an asset you don't own. Make the index legally unable to fall and keep the right to change the percentage, and you never have to ask for a raise again. You can be a committed monarchist and still notice that this is an unusual piece of financial engineering. The argument people have out loud is whether the monarchy is worth the money. The question underneath it is the one nobody's having, whether anything should be paid by a formula that only points one way. And that's the part actually in play. There's a bill going through Parliament right now whose entire purpose is to give the number away, down. If you want the real mechanics behind the money, verified, sourced, no hype, that's exactly what this channel does. Subscribe, and we'll take apart another one.